True North Politics time on this Monday. Good to have you here with us on CTV News Channel. Here's a question to think about. Is Canada being bullied on the world stage? Think of the different examples that are still playing out here in 2019. Let's begin with the Chinese, for example. This is a great one. Justin Trudeau has long talked about the need for Canada to deepen ties with the Chinese. Of course, we know, though, there is an escalating diplomatic showdown. 3 Canadians are being held currently against their will. 1 is now being threatened with the death penalty over alleged drug smuggling crimes. 2 other men are being held as well. Still no relief in sight. The Saudis, of course, in Saudi Arabia, causing a lot of issues with Canada as well, condemning our government over calling out the Saudis over human rights issues. Even the United States, a longtime ally of our country, now under Donald Trump with his protectionist U.S. first trade policies, is not the friend that we once had. So is it time for a rethink here? Let's bring in our true Northers who are standing by here to give us their take on what is being done, what more could be done. Tom Parkin for the NDP, Colin McDonald for the Liberals, Adrienne Batcher for the Conservatives. She works, of course, for the Toronto Sun. Adrienne, let me start with you, not for the Conservatives, but you do have an interesting perspective, as always, from that point of view. Your take on what more the Prime Minister could be doing, should be doing.
Well, I would hate to think that Canada is being perceived as sort of weak on the international stage. I mean, we all infamously remember when Justin Trudeau was elected in 2015, that famous few words, Canada's back. Well, if this is their version of Canada's back, then we're in somewhat trouble. But I just want to go quickly to what you said with respect to our relationship with President Trump. I think in part because we do have strained relations and we have been sort of under the protection for the most part under a very strong U.S. military and the strongest and closest ally we've had. Because those relations are strained, perhaps others around the world sort of perceive us as in a vulnerable position. And now with respect to the rethink, certainly there should always be a rethink when it comes to anything that we're doing on foreign affairs, international trade, things like that. But we do need to somehow reestablish a stronger footing. How that looks like, I mean, I don't have the perfect answer to that, but I don't doubt for a moment, however, that the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office and the Foreign Affairs Minister are talking about these things and having very real conversations about how we buttress ourselves even further. Yeah,
because there is this conversation. I mean, the Globe and Mail had it on their front page about, Trudeau's China policy has been exploded, they wrote on Saturday. Whether the Prime Minister, Tom, is being naive here, is sort of saying, Canada can walk that middle road, we can be different than the rest of the world, and yet we are caught up in something very interesting going on we've never seen before, this rise of populism in a world of Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, even Donald Trump. You've got Justin Trudeau.
And in India, I mean, not so many months ago, we had a report, the Atwell report, saying that India was meddling in the affairs of Canadian politics. So, this is something we haven't really seen. And yes, Canada is unique. We're Canadians. We're not a huge country, but we are an important country. And we come at it from, I think, a different perspective than the rest of the world. I think that it would be wrong for to try to make too much political hay out of these kind of things, partisan hay. I think if you are a Canadian traveling overseas anywhere in this world, you expect your government, NDP, Conservative or Liberal, to be ensuring that you have the kind of diplomatic, the courtesy of your embassy and your consul to give you support if you run into trouble in a foreign nation. That should be a given. So I think the challenge right here is, with so many people not being our strong allies anymore and us searching, we need to work extra hard, not just as a government, but an entire group of politicians that has on both sides, on all sides, who have a responsibility for the future, to look to the allies that we have and have values like ours and strengthen those. And it's very tough right now because a lot of Europe is in a lot of difficulty. But we can sift through these cases and build the relationships and strengthen the bond here at home. I think we'll get through this tough patch.
Colin, I wonder whether you think it's fair when you hear critics say that this is sort of a kumbaya type of foreign policy approach. Let's all hold hands and be friends. It's just unrealistic. On the other hand, some would say that this is exactly what Canada needs to do.
Yeah, so I mean, I think a few things. First of all, sometimes we fall victim to thinking that things that are happening in the moment are somehow unique or different than things that have happened previously. Obviously, with China as an example, we have had previously strained relations, and we've come out with better and stronger relations on the other end. Famously under the first mandate of Prime Minister Harper's government, relations were incredibly strained and very negative. I think obviously the Prime Minister and all Canadians believe that the Prime Minister's job is to advocate on behalf of the individuals who've been detained in China. I think the issue with President Trump and his administration, I think, again, all Canadians would assume and expect that the Prime Minister will always advance the interests of Canadians in their relationship with the Americans, that we will take a respectful, diplomatic but strong approach to the Americans. I think, by all accounts, that is the approach that Prime Minister Trudeau and his government have taken and come out of these NAFTA negotiations, for example, doing much better than perhaps it would have looked at certain points in the negotiating period. So I think this is a difficult period in some cases, obviously very personally difficult for a few individuals. I think the government of Canada has a responsibility and is actively advocating on behalf of those people. And I think if you want to look at our world image, you look at those who we do line up with, and those leaders, democratic, rule of law abiding, rule of law respecting leaders all around the world, continue to view Canada as a very strong partner.
All right, let's move on to the Conservatives in Quebec making their pitch to try and win over Quebec voters ahead of this election. As the three of you know, I'm from there, and it is always a challenge for the Conservatives in the province of Quebec. Brian Mulroney was successful, but of course he came from Baie-Comeau, and he was a progressive Conservative, and he brought together this coalition of the West and Quebec together successfully in the 1980s. But now Andrew Scheer is trying to do something similar, and you've got the Maxime Bernier wild card in the Beauce region of Quebec as well with his People's Party of Canada. I'm going to start with you on this one, Tom Parkin. Your take. Is this mission impossible?
It's a tough one. Brian Mulroney was a Quebecer. He understood the business class there. He understood how to play within the nationalist, soft nationalist group and propose la beau risque. The idea that let's take the risk as Quebecers to stay in Canada with a different arrangement. I don't see that kind of idea coming. In fact, it seems to be more of now with what's I think the Conservatives often call the blue wedge or the blue triangle around Quebec City, that now they're into a fight to maintain what they have in Quebec City, and they haven't been able to expand out of that for quite some time. So, you know, the whole idea of pressing conservative values on identity issues is quite a bit different than proposing a broad, as Mulroney would have said, beau risque for Canada.
Colin McDonald, your read.
Yeah, I think Andrew Scheer is in tough here. I think the Conservative Party of Canada is in tough here. They're fighting on a couple of fronts, and I don't think either of them look all that promising for them. Obviously, they're going to be advancing a platform and a vision of the next 4 years that will be broadly will not resonate in the province of Quebec. You know, the things that the Conservatives will be trumpeting the loudest will largely be things that the province of Quebec has already moved on from or is not in alignment with. I think also, obviously, having driven Maxime Bernier out of the party, causing him to create his own fledgling People's Party, that will cause them some great concern in that sort of small core of conservative-leaning seats in Quebec that they tend to rely on as their base to build out from. So I think those two things pulled together with a leader, frankly, who has yet to resonate in that province, and I think it's probably an open question whether he ever will, cause the Conservatives a great deal of trouble going into the election.
Quebec has 78 seats, Adrian, as you know, so you know you can't ignore it. I mean, you have to at least make a pitch here. Is this going to resonate enough, though? Well,
it's one of those things that it's a difference between a majority or minority government because of the amount of seats that are on the table in Quebec. But if you ever want to see a room full of Conservative strategists sort of wring their hands, just bring up, you know, the Q word, because that's what, you know, consistently frustrates them and vexes them. You know, goalposts are always changing, but the viewpoint is, you know, that the values and the ideas that they're putting forward are far more appropriate. They will resonate, but right now, as of today, Andrew Scheer's biggest problem in Quebec is not necessarily Maxime Bernier, it's Jagmeet Singh. So unless the NDP, by some miracle, actually pull up their numbers in the province of Quebec, this is you know not going to be an easy one for Justin Trudeau, but certainly not going to be challenging because they're not going to look at the NDP to put their vote. They're going to look at the Liberals, and so somehow Andrew Scheer has to cut through some of that. One of the proposals, of course, that he made was for a single tax. application from the residents of Quebec, which is very similar, in fact, exactly what the Premier just asked the Prime Minister for recently. So maybe they're going to try on the economic issues and hopefully help that translate into a handful of seats outside of Montreal, where they traditionally are supported.
All right, we only got about 2.5 minutes. I'll ask all three of you to be as concise as possible. Let's talk about Jagmeet Singh, though, and what's going on in the Lower Mainland, in Burnaby South, hoping to win that. It seems now the odds are in his favor after the original Liberal candidate dropped out. There's a new one now coming up, but Singh seems to be, well, judging by some of the polls that we've seen recently, a bit of a lock-in. Colin McDonald, I'm going to start with you on this just quickly. Your take on what's at stake here for Singh. Does he have this?
So, I mean, even if Mr. Singh is able to pull off this by-election, he still has a task ahead of him to convince New Democrats that he's actually best suited to lead them into the next election. That seems to be an open question, and to have as many people talking in the background about whether or not he is suited to do that from a party that is traditionally pretty loyal to their leaders, allowing them at least one election before they kick them to the curb. I think Mr. Singh has a few tasks in front of him. One, obviously, he's got to win this by-election. If not, he's probably done. Once he wins the by-election, he's going to have to try and convince New Democrats and energize New Democrats that he's their leader, and then he can try and make his case to the rest of us.
Tom Parkin.
Yeah, I think a little bit of a turning of the corner last week. Yes, first of all, he started the week finding out a poll came out in the public sphere, nearly get 40% in Burnaby South, so that's obviously, and what, a good solid lead. So that's a bit of a wind in the sail, and everybody feels more relieved. Then, of course, the Liberal candidate self-immolates in this kind of racially divisive social media post. He does a successful interview just last night on a competing network last night, Todd. So I think the trend is going in his favor, and today he's going to start talking about proactive policy, asking the question of how, why our government can put billions of dollars into a pipeline but seems to never take action on things like housing or pharmacare. These are good questions. He's going to put his own plan out today, so he's moving into a positive footing.
Adrian Batra.
Up until the Liberal candidate, erupted last week in the riding, it was a very competitive three-way race. I'm going to give this. I'm going to give this to Mr. Singh. I think he's going to eke it out because the NDP is going to dump every single resource into that riding to ensure that he wins it. He still has an uphill battle, as Colin said, with his caucus, and making that case to Canadians will be just as more difficult.
Adrian Batra, Tom Barkin, and Colin McDonald. Great to have the three of you with us. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See ya.